How did you get into composing music?
It began really when I was a child. There was always music around the house, and my siblings and I, my parents, were quite musical, and I think because we enjoyed singing so much around the piano, that we enjoyed making up our own melodies and our own harmonies, and gradually you realize that you enjoy creating music as much as you do performing existing music. And I think that really began to happen from infancy. And gradually, as I got older and got to know more about music and more exposed to a variety of music, being from early music, classical music, gospel music, Jamaican music, what have you, I began to be fascinated by the way that music worked. Rhythms, melodies, harmonies, subject matter, how it works with the emotions and the mind, and wanting very much to kind of draw all of that information together from all my cultural influences and bring that into one thing.
Your triple concerto for rapper, turntables and human beatbox was recently premiered at the Barbican Hall, London. How did that piece come together?
I wanted to do something with hip-hop music for quite a while, and in fact in '98 I did a piece called I Am for Rainbow Over Bath, where I had two opera singers, Rodney Clark, bass baritone, Annabelle Williams, soprano, and then Cutmaster Swift on the decks, and Finn as a rapper, and with a chamber orchestra we put together. That was the first outing, and I'd worked a lot with spoken word artists as well, the Last Poets, Mango Link Manifest. But then I started speaking with DJ Pogo and John Zidee initially about doing a concerto, which was going to be for piano, myself playing, John Zidee doing performance poetry, and DJ Pogo on the decks. And then the opportunity came up from the London Philharmonic to do a piece for a children's concert commemorating the 200th year of abolition, Wilberforce Parliamentary Act. And they wanted something to blend contemporary urban music with classical music, and I thought, well, that's just the piece. And I got together with Purple, who's a established grime rapper on the London scene, Faith SFX, who's an amazing human beatboxer, former UK b-boy champion, and the legendary DJ Pogo. And the first was really to create a piece which worked with the speech rhythms of a rap. So not a piece which was over a drum beat, but looking at the rhythm in the speech and bringing that into notation and orchestrating an atmosphere around that. So I had a free movement work with an introduction, poetry-led, the first movement, and the second movement with the decks and the beatbox, and then a whole solo section for the turntables and human beatbox. We performed to just under 4,000 young people between the ages of 11 and 16 over 2 concerts, and it brought the house down. It was a 6-minute piece, and now we're going to do a 25-minute piece.
How did you become involved in Awakening, your first narrative ballet?
Awakening, which was performed at Sadlers Wells in 2004, came together by Ben Love, someone who I collaborated with before, approached me with a project which Push had commissioned him to do. And Ben and I had kind of worked with each other, not for the stage, but just working to get a feel of what we could do with ballet and music. Ben having a Kenyan background and a Brazilian background, brought up in Nottingham, and myself with a Jamaican background, brought up in England. And for what can we do with our respective traditions, augmented by the classical traditions of ballet and classical music, orchestra music, to create a new language. And the opportunity presented itself. And we went about looking for story ideas. And I had a wonderful book called The Hero with an African Face by Clyde W. Ford, which is an adaptation of Joseph Campbell's book on mythology, The Hero with a Thousand Faces, from which films like Star Wars and what have you drawn from. But Clyde W. Ford's book was very much about African heroic mythology, both heroine myths and hero myths. And we found a story which was very compelling, an Ashanti tale, And the wonderful thing is it had Anansi in there, characters which is well known in South America and the Caribbean, and a whole host of other kind of creation myths and death myths. And well, that's a great narrative idea. Tragedy, romantic, in there there's sorrowful, there's kind of magic and mystery. And we thought that was kind of very fitting to a kind of South American, Caribbean, and African, and also works very much within the kind of Eastern European classical idea. So we worked at the Royal Opera House for perhaps about 12 weeks, composed the whole thing, from music, story, characters, costumes, everything in 12 weeks. A very short space of time, because they used to take a year to do these kind of things. And we ended up having 4 performances on the main stage of Sadlers Wells, which was a great success for us all. Yeah.
Excellent. Can you treat our viewers to a piece that you've composed?
Certainly. I'm about to play a part of a prelude for a ballet called Prelude to a Storm. Well, this particular part's called Prelude to a Storm, and it's very much about conjuring up wind and oceans and water splashing against rocks, and with a sense of flight going above a tempest. Yeah.
Do you have any more ballets in the pipeline?
Yes, I've since worked with Ernst Meissner from the Royal Ballet, with Royal Ballet dancers, and also from the Kirov Mariinsky Ballet. We did a piece in 2005, and we're looking at doing some more pieces now with the same combination of dancers. I'm at the moment composing a ballet score adaptation of Roald Dahl's famous children's novel, James and the Giant Peach, and I guess many people remember having that story read to them or reading that presently to their own kids. Yeah. But Aunt Spike, Aunt Sponge, Glowworm, you know, the Cloud Men, Rainbow Men, etc. And I was really inspired about doing that idea because I met Felicity Dahl, Roald Dahl's widow, and we got talking about ballet and about really getting children into music. And it made me think about, well, what made me excited about orchestra music when I was a child? Yeah. And it's because we had really good headmasters who made us listen and brought orchestras into us or took us to concerts and explained what was going on, and you could kind of hear what was going on in the themes. So I think it was really good to attend to doing something for children. Yes. But Roald Dahl's quite clever because he's very adult, very naughty, very mischievous and very dark, at the same time as being light and playful and cheerful. So it means you can do something for adults and as much for children, because I guess it's about, he writes for the adult to read to the child. Yes. And then for the child to enjoy, and so you never lose sight of the story as you grow up. So we want to kind of create something which is a magical world of this giant peach and all these characters, which will be as compelling for adults as it would be for children.
London Philharmonic Orchestra have commissioned a major work from you, Ras Caleb, a Jamaican opera in 3 parts. Tell us about this project.
This project is very dear to my heart, and I say pretty much it's at the centre of my life as we speak. Having gone to Jamaica for the first time between the age of 4 and 5 and continue to have a relationship with my grandparents and cousins and aunts and uncles and what have you, I've been exposed to Jamaican life in the country, in the hills, in the city, and then exported into a British mainland vernacular. And everything about it, its language, its food, its belief systems, or dramatic, or operatic. Everybody's a character, larger than life. Whether you're getting on a bus to go to the market, whether you're in church, whether you're in the town square, whether it's a carnival. And even at the darkest of times, there seems to be an optimism, a lightness. And, you know, expressing misery still has an air of humour with the way that Jamaican patois works. And I thought, well, you know, I want to create something out of these many different dimensions of Jamaica. So I've created my own story, Ras Caleb, which is about a young boy born in the country, who goes to the city, goes to university, drops out of university, is looking for greater meaning, goes to the hills to seek enlightenment, comes back having extraordinary experiences and trying to reintegrate back into life and to make Jamaica or its destiny great. It's magical realism, it's psychological thriller, it's sci-fi. Social realism of the everyday parochial events set aside something which is very extraordinary and epic, sung in Jamaican patois and English. 65-piece orchestra, 40-piece chorus, 10 principal singers and actors and dancers. Nothing like this has come out of the Caribbean, composed by a black composer. And I think, you know, the 21st century, we've heard, you know, Eastern European tales, Western European tales. We've all enjoyed Japanese films, Kung Fu, what have you. We've not quite heard Africa, South America and the Caribbean in its epic storytelling poise. And I think we're able to deliver human stories for the whole world, but for the world to see stories through our eyes. Because it's possible for us to, you know, relate emotionally to Hollywood and to see ourselves through the characters who are not like ourselves. It'll be interesting to see that the whole world can see itself through the story of someone from an island such as Jamaica. And not simply the tourist fantasy of sand, sea and sun, reggae, rice and peas, and through swear words thrown in for good measure. but the most profound philosophical aspects of human meaning and existence and religious inquiry. So that's what Ras Caleb's all about. And it's going to take me about a year to write. I'm in it right now. And we're going to be launching off in the summer of 2009 at the Royal Festival Hall, and then taking it to opera houses around the world.
Excellent. Ras Caleb, a Jamaican opera in 3 acts.
Indeed.
I look forward to seeing that.
Yeah.
Paul, this is Internet TV, Five Eyes. Where would viewers have heard your work?
Most of my music to date has been performed live. So, you know, Royal Albert Hall, Festival Hall, Queen Elizabeth Hall, Purcell Rooms, and then a few halls up and down the country and some abroad as well. There has been broadcast in Radio 3, Radio 4, World Service and Radio 2. And it has been used, my music's been used in films by Isaac Julian, 5 of his films, and also on television, BBC television as well. But hopefully, you know, there'll be much more in the next few years to a wider public through television, CDs, etc.
Have you got a favourite modern musical artist or band?
It's very difficult for me to think of a favourite artist, but I'd say that my musical background has always included hip-hop, reggae, gospel, classical music, film music, theatre music. And funnily enough, some of the best things I've ever heard of my life are not famous. They're in churches. You'd never know who they are. But the most profound musical experience I've had, and also being, you know, sitting with some Naibengi drummers in the hill in Jamaica and hearing amazing music making from that. But having said that, you know, you're going to see me as happily dancing to Pussycat Girls, Dolls, or whatever they're called, as you are to Most Def, or, you know, I've had my moments with heavy metal, bands like Dream Theater, the grime artists I like in London, such as Purple, Faith SFX. It's incredibly broad, and people accuse me of the kind of musical schizophrenia when they come to my house, because in an hour I seem to kind of jump from opera, Alban Berg, to listening to Common, and you know, Erykah Badu, and then Bob Marley, and then, you know, a Debussy piano piece, and they think I'm mad. But I like it. It's all fun.
Okay. So how does Paul Gladstone Reid relax? Chill out time. You know, you've got to put the time in.
Well, I used to meditate. I don't do that much now, and I really need to get back to it. I like working out, and I also like cooking and bringing friends around to have dinner parties. And I love walking. I think that's probably one of my favourite times, especially if I'm in the country as well. You know, to kind of get away from the mad city and breathe some fresh air and walk up a hill. I climbed Ben Nevis last year. And then I also like reading as well, going to the cinema, you know, all that kind of stuff.
Ben Nevis, wasn't there anything that would be a bit dangerous?
I was with a whole bunch of friends from the army who, if they don't feel like they're almost killing themselves every day, they're not living. I mean, they're kind of, you know, they need to live on the edge. And I was told we were going for an afternoon walk. And little did I know, I'll be up at the highest peak of the British mountain. But luckily I survived. It's all well. Yeah.
All right, okay. Paul, have you been influenced by any black composers, or can you tell us about any black composers that you've...
Indeed. You know, at school I was never taught about black classical composers, or indeed, I guess, the black presence in Europe, you know, post-war, you know, from the Moors, you know, in 500 AD, going all the way up, and how their music, with the black Moors from Africa and the Arabs' music, and the poetry of Rumi, Sufi poet, influenced the development of early music and the troubadours, which went into the Elizabethan tradition.
Okay.
All of that's fascinating, and the instruments at that time are very similar. Also with Irish music, they chronicle their music to North Africa, with the barons and the way that they sing, and the kind of improvised ornamentation on the vocal line. So that going into Baroque music, really interesting. With European history and culture, it seems that the Catholic period was embracing of a kind of their kind of pagan past in a way, much more sensual. So their music, there's a lot more going on rhythmically in there. But the Protestant, I think, was about being away from pleasure, so they all became very straight again.
Yes.
So there's a time where I believe European music and the music of the Middle East, would you say, the Mediterranean and parts of Africa, were not that different, because their religion and their ceremony was very dance-worthy. But I went on to learn after the Moors about people like George Bridgetower, who was a violinist. In fact, he was like the top violinist for Beethoven. So Beethoven used to compose for him to do all the premieres. So he was up and down, the top guy in Europe.
I would never have known that.
You know, he used to live in the Mall as a guest of the Prince of Wales, the son of George the Fourth. You know, all of this has kind of got on here. Joseph Emedy is a very fascinating story because he was press ganged. He was taken as a slave from Guinea to Brazil, yes, and then taken by the Portuguese to Portugal. And he ended up at the age of about 22 being the second principal violinist of the Lisbon Opera. So, you know, so one day, Captain Edward Pellows, who's been talked about, I don't know if you know Hornblower, the program on TV. Yes. Pellows is very much involved with that. Well, yes, Pellows, on the Indefatigable, which is the very ship in Hornblower, saw him at the opera and thought, I'm having a bit of that. So they press ganged him after one of his operas, put him on the ship. He had to play jigs for about 7 years after he played like the best, most sophisticated music. And then he was dumped in Cornwall. So basically, he became the big cheese in Cornwall, ended up in Truro, and is buried in Truro, died in 1835. We actually did a concert in honor of him. What's interesting about that period of music is that not everything was written on the page. There was cadenza, and you could improvise an ornament. So one is always, you know, curious as to what might those musicians have brought with them from the blend, yes, of cultures around them, including their African backgrounds, but other aspects of gypsy music in Europe or folk music into their classical composition. In the 20th century, you know, we have people like William Grant Still, who was the first composer to be commissioned by a major symphony orchestra, the Orchestra of Rochester, in America, and composed the African-American Symphony. He also was a great influence to George Gershwin, he and W.C. Handy, and had been orchestrators. At the time, you couldn't get a publishing deal as a black man in those days of apartheid in America. So often a white composer would have to front for them. I'm not quite sure whether they got paid all their royalties. But now you have people like Akinuba, who's from Nigeria, who's a professor of composition. He's resident at Cambridge College and does a convention of African composers, black music composers every year. And also Ninketieh, who's Ethiopian and also has been a professor in Boston. So there is a tradition now about looking at the plethora of black music and looking at the classical tradition and knowing that Austrians and the Russians and French and all of them have kind of found a way of bringing in their folk feel, melody, rhythm and harmony and story, subject matter into orchestral music. That we know, the more we start translating from our popular black music, our gospel music, our jazz or African music, you know, that we'll create something incredible for ballet, opera, orchestra music, song cycles, chamber music, etc. So that's a really exciting thing for me whenever I, you know, have a piece of African drumming and I can think of a pianistic interpretation of that.
Paul, wouldn't you like to give us an example?
Yeah, I guess I could do. I mean, there's one particular part in Awakening, the ballet we spoke about earlier on.
you have to say to those kids out there who might want to follow in your footsteps?
I would say the cliche of 1% inspiration, 99% perspiration. Talent is a gift, but, you know, somebody can give you a gift of shoes, but you have to kind of polish them and kind of keep them maintained. I think with your talent, you have to polish your craft, your skill, all the time. It never ends. And like a plant, you need to keep watering it and giving it nutrients. You need to give yourself stimulation, different things that's going to inspire your creative process. And practice, 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 practice. I mean, I've been through periods of time where I practiced religiously 8 hours a day. And even when I was doing my A-levels, it was like that. And the ridiculous thing is, to be excellent at anything, you have to go into nerdism. Yes. You're going to become a nerd.
Yes.
But it's fine. There's certain nerdisms which are fine. You know, if you're doing skateboarding, you practice every day. And I know because I live near the skateboarding park.
Yes.
And they practice, practice, practice. And when I was also in breakdancing crews, in my teens, we practiced, practice, practice. Because if you don't, you're going to get dissed when you go to battle.
Yes, yes.
Same with BMX or whatever else. It seems to be fine to practice in football, but not fine to practice when it comes to music. And also the myth of black music, like we just feel it, we do it, we don't really think about it. But that's great for audiences to enjoy, to not really know what goes on behind the scenes. But actually, the excellence which we've produced in the 20th century and into the 21st century has come by people who work hard, hard, hard. And of course, you need to present a very easy thing to the public for them to enjoy. You don't necessarily need to be burdened with, you know, how hard you practice, but behind the scenes, to do anything great, you know. I mean, I don't stop. I'm at it all the time, which is, you know, relevant. You ask me when do I relax? It's very, you know, to switch the brain off, to not be thinking about something that's to do with work. But it's enjoyable as well. Once you get into exceeding your personal best every time, that gives you a buzz.
Okay.
You know, so even though it's hard work,
Yes.
you go for a pain threshold, and then, you know, it's good.
Yes. Thank you. Okay, thank you very much, Paul Gladstone Reid. This has been 5 Hours TV Profiles.
Pleasure.
Thank you very
Thanks
much.
so much for the opportunity.
Thank you.